It's been 7 years since a Gearbox developed Borderlands game. Did I stutter? In that time, I graduated high school, had my first year of college, I took a gap year, learned to drive, got my first job, made thousands of YouTube videos and other channels, streamed hundreds of hours on Twitch, made a short film called Bread, watch it on my other channel in the description below please. 4 Star Wars movies came out, 17 Marvel movies, I made lifelong friends and played a lot of Borderlands 2. Suffice to say, entire chapters of my life have gone by, and all the while, I've been waiting for Borderlands 3. Unfortunately, in the same way I've grown up and changed since playing Borderlands 2 as a Mountain Dew addicted 13-year-old, so has the gaming industry, and not always in the best of ways. Anti-consumer trends are all over the market, and some game publishers have become super greedy. Microtransactions, broken releases, and other unethical practices are rampant and threaten some of our most beloved games, like Borderlands. Due to an Epic Games exclusivity deal, I won't be able to play Borderlands 3 on Steam, my platform of choice, until April next year. If you don't know why the Epic Games Store is still so contentious, I recommend Googling it. I ended up buying the game on my PS4, but it wasn't an easy purchase to make. Behind the gameplay demos and promotional material for the game, Gearbox CEO Randy Pitchford has made something of an ass of himself in the public eye, responding to media reception and criticism in a not-so-charming way, while also being accused of collecting child pornography on a thumb drive he left at a restaurant, and being sued by former Gearbox executive of license and business development and the voice of Claptrap, David Eddings, resulting in an entirely new voice actor for Claptrap. 2K also sent investigators to the house of Submato, a prominent content creator for the Borderlands community, for leaking information about the game and later suspending his channel. That is exceptionally harsh. It's important for me to mention all these things because it may affect your decision to support Borderlands 3 and to what extent. It's good to have a healthy awareness of the ethics surrounding a game, even if you still plan to play it, as it seems just about every other AAA game nowadays has some sort of controversy attached to it, and as a consumer, we hold all the power. That being said, this isn't a video about the controversy surrounding the game. Instead, it's about you, me, and Borderlands 3. Borderlands 3 is a galaxy-spanning adventure with a humongous cast of characters and all the innovations you expect from the looter-shooter genre over the last few years. A genre that ironically exploded a little bit after Borderlands 2, and yet it still feels familiar, in a good way of course. It still feels like Borderlands, but with age comes wisdom. And with that comes a game that has a better understanding of what it wants to be. And no, it's not poop jokes. Under the surface is a game that is effectively about something. Something bigger than itself, something a little sappy for a game this absurd, but something nonetheless. However, in order to understand what that is for what it is, we need to take a step back. Let's start from the beginning. The back-to-back development of Borderlands 1 and 2 left Gearbox creatively exhausted and in need of a break. 2K Games gave Gearbox the green light to go all in on their next big IP, 2016's Battleborn, a game that, while flawed, was only a sequel away from being fully realized, a sequel that will probably never happen. In the years since, between on-again, off-again rumors of the next Borderlands game, Gearbox released Borderlands The Handsome Collection, Borderlands 2 VR, a re-release of Bulletstorm, and they apparently also had a hand in publishing Fortnite for consoles, which was news to me. To any outsider, it might seem like Gearbox has been coasting on empty for a few years now, devoid of the same stroke of genius and energy they possessed during the development of Borderlands 1 and 2. If Borderlands 3 was ever going to happen, would it be as good as what came before? Would Gearbox fail to deliver and earn the reputation of a washed-up developer? The truth is, no one would know for sure until 2019. On March 28th, Gearbox revealed Borderlands 3 to the world. They had technical difficulties, mind you, which would ironically curse much of the subsequent PR for the game, but it was in the public eye for the first time ever. I remember sitting in my university lunch hall rewatching the reveal trailer over and over until my phone died. I was both internally bursting with joy and in a bit of disbelief. The day I waited practically my entire teenage life for had actually arrived. And it was one of the best days I had this year. One of the other best days being the day I got to play the game. It was evident enough from the trailers and wacky promotional material for the game, but having spent nearly 80 hours with Borderlands 3 by the time of this video, it goes without saying that the Gearbox who made Borderlands 2 is back. Under the leadership of creative director Paul Sage, Borderlands 3 is a labor of hard work and interesting ideas. Though Unreal Engine 4 forced Gearbox to build Borderlands from the ground up all over again, it did afford them a sizable number of technical improvements, including better lighting, more detailed textures, more reactive physics, and overall more player control. However, just as with previous games, the artists of Gearbox spent an agonizing amount of time inking in every hard line you see in the world and the characters of the game. The look of Borderlands is not a filter you apply in Photoshop. People did all of that by hand, which, needless to say, is an astounding achievement. The ability to vault over objects seems like a fun new mechanic, but it presented a challenge to Gearbox to give their levels and environments a new sense of verticality that Borderlands didn't have before. The promise to go to new worlds and locations also challenged Gearbox's understanding of the series' identity. How do you retain the feeling of the series by also creating entirely new, different feeling worlds? The approach they settled on? Create entirely new environments, but make them shitty. They also hired an all-star team of composers, Jesper, Michael McCann, Raison, Varner, along with Brian Trifon and Brian Lee White, a finishing move to give each of the new locales a distinct musical flavor. If you played the game and didn't have the music drowned out by the overwhelming amount of new and punctual gun sounds recorded for the game, you've heard the sound of one of the most interesting collaborative musical productions in a AAA game of maybe this decade. Suffice to say, this is probably my favorite score for a game since 2016's Doom. Oh, and there was one other important decision Gearbox made to tie things together. They asked the Heavy to write a new song for the game's intro. Borderlands 3 introduces 4 new Vault Hunters. You got Mose the Gunner, an outcast who survives off of Ariana Grande references in her Titanfall mech alone, Amara the Siren, who could probably knock you cold just by looking at her abs if she was real, Flak, an advanced Beastmaster robot voiced by ProZD, and last but not least, Zane. Good old Fastlane Zane, the pain train and my main in the main campaign of Borderlands 3, though I don't like him as much as Zero. The replayability I boasted about for the Vault Hunters of Borderlands 2 is damn near tripled, if not quadrupled in 3. With the exception of Mose, who can customize the guns on her mech, all the Vault Hunters have 3 action skills to choose from, which opens up entirely new possibilities of how to build your character and use their abilities. You could potentially play the game 8 times over, twice with each Vault Hunter, and experience a considerably different gameplay experience each time if you build your character accordingly. That's nuts. And that doesn't even factor how the new gunplay mechanics change the recipe of enemy encounters in the game. 3 may not edit the series formula too much, but the complete overhaul of gun manufacturers and their varying attributes has widened the spectrum of gun variation like never before. Guns that track their target, guns that ricochet and critical hit, guns that turn into turrets when thrown. The possibilities aren't endless, but they feel like it, and it really demonstrates Gearbox's dedication to both surprising and empowering the player through their limitless imagination. Simply put, a looter shooter has never been this fun. Period. I would say don't get me started on the amount of quality of life improvements in Borderlands 3, but I feel they need to be pointed out. Cooperative mode with instanced looting, so you and your friends never have to fight over loot ever again. Level sync, so that a level 1 can play with a level 30 and experience equal difficulty while also being equally effective. Lost loot, so that you never lose a legendary that flies out of bounds. Quick travel from anywhere and even quick traveling back to your vehicle. Pinging loot, enemies and locations for other players a la Apex Legends. Refilling ammo with a single button press at vending machines. Buying SDUs to increase ammo and inventory space with cash, so that there's an actual money sink in Borderlands now. A cleaner inventory screen, which isn't amazing and needs better sorting options, though it's nice to have and will probably be patched to perfection over time. Different levels of mayhem mode, so players can grind endgame loot at their own level of skill. Customizable vehicles, personable guns, the ability to change Claptrap's antenna, need I say more? The number of QL improvements made in Borderlands 3 is positively staggering. And for that reason, you can imagine how baffled I was to read the words, "Nothing has changed since Borderlands 2." A bizarre disconnect echoed by a surprising number of Borderlands 3's critics. I would attempt to level with this claim, but it's just absurdly false, especially since it implies the gameplay loop of Borderlands 2 was in severe need of an overhaul, which isn't exactly fair to the sturdy player base the game held for 7 years. I would also love to prop up the narrative that Borderlands 3 fails because of 2K, Randy Pitchford, the Epic Games Store, or any of the other controversies attached to the game, but at the end of the day, the hard work of hundreds of Gearbox programmers, engineers, artists, and coordinators who worked on Borderlands 3 speaks far louder volumes. Nuff said. The end of Borderlands 2 promised something of a journey across the stars, an all-out blitz for as many vaults as possible. If delivered upon, the sequel to Borderlands 2 would likely be the most ambitious game in the series. And frankly, there could not be a more accurate description of what that very game ended up being. Earlier when I mentioned the different areas of development for Borderlands 3, there was one group I forgot to mention: the writer's room. Previous Borderlands games had one writer each to tell their story: Mikey Newman for Borderlands 1 and Anthony Birch for Borderlands 2. But with the new Borderlands going to the stars and expanding upon lore exponentially, Gearbox formed their first ever narrative department, a team of writers and creatives dedicated to sharing the storytelling load. At the forefront of that department is Danny Harman and Sam Winkler, the lead writers of Borderlands 3. Their mission: make the biggest Borderlands game ever. Borderlands 3 is massive. It's a roller coaster with humongous drops and sharp turns. There are several stretches of gameplay where it feels like the intensity and ridiculousness are cranked all the way up. The game will throw these off-the-wall gameplay encounters, story beats, and visuals at you in erratic bursts, keeping you on the edge of your seat for possibly hours. Sometimes it does this in weirdly unexpected ways, like this one mission where you're driving through a canyon Mad Max style, except there's jazz music playing on the radio. It's a hilarious subversion. Some of my favorite moments in the game probably occur during the arc on Promethea, a sieged-up Blade Runner-esque world where you help Reese from Tales from the Borderlands take back the planet. The curveballs this chapter throws at you range anywhere from hilarious to fucking intense. It's great. At the same time, Borderlands 3 does have a quieter side, which really shines during the arc on Eden 6, a mix between Jurassic Park and the New Orleans Bayou. You'll still experience moments of a similar caliber to Promethea, but they're spread out a little more in favor of fleshing out a conflict between Hammerlock and his sister. By the way, holy shit for Hammerlock? This caricature of a big game hunter we've known for years has been fleshed out in a pretty heartbreaking way, and it's a perfect example of the many ways in which Borderlands 3 treats its cast of characters lovingly. That goes for both characters new and old. Seeing characters like Zero and Maya play a role in the story is pretty rewarding as a longtime fan of Borderlands 2, but so is seeing characters who've usually been set in the background of these games get utilized in a big way. Most of the new characters rock, though the one I want to highlight in particular is Ava, a scavenger who studies under Maya and is one of the most hated characters in the game, for mostly understandable reasons. This is definitely an unpopular opinion, but I really liked Ava. She's refreshingly reserved compared to the colossal personalities spread throughout the game, and she reminded me that there's still some normal in the Borderlands universe. The series needed someone like her. Other than that, some characters from past Borderlands games are notably snubbed here, though Gearbox probably had a difficult time balancing so many characters in a single narrative that some had to sit on the sidelines this time around. It sucks, but they'll probably appear in the DLC. To accommodate for the huge cast of characters, along with the intergalactic scale of Borderlands 3, your new hub is a spaceship called Sanctuary 3. Like any great spaceship in anything ever, it really feels like home and has everything you need. Just about every room in the ship is occupied by a different character, and sometimes it's just fun to stop by to hear them talk about the last mission or tell a joke. It honestly reminded me of Mass Effect, and made me wish for more crew interaction, even if this isn't that type of game. Zero and Hammerlock hang up bounties from targets you've killed on your journey, and you can personalize your own quarters using looted decorations, which feels like a small yet rewarding way to commemorate your adventures. In all these ways and more, Borderlands 3 completely delivers on the promise of 2's ending, which for a fan of the series was exactly what I wanted and expected, and alone left me very satisfied. However, in crafting a story of such big proportions, some of its most important parts may have been blown a little too out of proportion. Particularly, two characters that drive the central conflict of Borderlands 3, the Calypso twins. Before we go any further, something needs to be addressed. It almost sounds like a trope, but you can't make a better video game villain than Handsome Jack. Jack is an intellectual asshole who constantly kicks the player down, outsmarts you at the height of all your victories, and manipulates the connections you share with other characters. At the same time, he's oddly sympathetic and shows an insecurity for betrayal and fear of losing his daughter. Even by itself, the quest to stop Handsome Jack is a white-knuckling journey through hell and back, and a testament to one of the most thoughtfully written villains in gaming. Combine that with Damien Clark's lightning in a bottle performance, and you have Handsome Jack. Gearbox knew they couldn't top that, and so they never bothered to. Instead, they opted for something different. Picture the two douchiest internet personalities you could ever think of, give them siren superpowers, and you get Troy and Tyrene Calypso, the villains of Borderlands 3. Using an army of followers known as the Children of the Vault, they wage a war on the Crimson Raiders to find the mythical Great Vault, a vault to end all vaults, if you will. They're easily the most powerful villains in the series and pose the greatest threat. However, they're also the most obnoxious. I wasn't annoyed by them too often, but I can see people rolling their eyes non-stop. The best way I can put it, in the words of my coworker, is Handsome Jack is a villain you hate and love, while the Calypso twins are villains you love to hate. The Calypso twins raise an important question about the writing of video game villains. Does writing a villain that irritates the player enough to want to defeat them make for a compelling villain? Optimistically, I would like to answer this by saying yes. Take Bowser for instance. This mofo is constantly sabotaging Mario, and no matter how many times you defeat him, he always comes back. Also, he's a real bitch to fight in Smash. But there are far more dimensions to a character like Bowser than simply an irritating presence. Look at his design. He's an evil cartoon dragon turtle. The yellow-green color scheme is simple, yet spot on. It's an iconic design and a core reason why Bowser is memorable, aside from how repeatedly he's used, of course. His motives are also relatively simple, to marry Princess Peach, to rule Mushroom Kingdom, etc, etc. That's not to say simplicity is always the key to a good video game villain, but it helps, especially in their design. Take Voss from Far Cry 3. Again, simple design, red color scheme, mohawk, and a green jewel necklace. The dude is beyond irritating, sometimes to the point where he gets under your skin, but Voss also wants to prove something to you, and his philosophical motive is far from simple. As a result, Voss's presence is constantly felt, even when he's absent. Maybe it's unfair to compare some of the best video game villains ever to the New Kids on the Block, but I think it really highlights some of the areas where the Calypso twins fail as villains. Since we just talked a good bit about it, let's start with their design. Both Troy and Tyrene look extremely complicated. There are some good choices made with their design, such as giving Troy an oversized robot arm and Tyrene her overcoat, but there's just far too many cooks in the kitchen with their visual style. Maybe that's the point. They are flashy villains with enormous personalities, but could this not have been conveyed in a more visually concise way, either through using less colors or eliminating intricacies in their clothing? Regardless, their design unfortunately doesn't leave a very strong impression on the player. At times, the Calypso twins' motives are also a bit unrefined. At the start of the game, you learn from Lilith that the Children of the Vault have been waging war on the Crimson Raiders for years. Because of this, it seems like the Calypso twins are only after fame and fortune, building a massive militarized following to satiate their equally massive egos. But as the game unfolds, you start to learn that they are actually after the so-called Great Vaults, which the Crimson Raiders aren't even sure exists. The Calypsos then proceed to throw their endless droves of COV followers at you in an attempt to thwart your quest to open each vault and every planet you travel to. But the thing is, they sort of need you to open the vault and do the hard work for them so that they can reap the rewards at the end of it. It really begs the question, why do the Calypsos even need the COV if their plan is more likely to succeed if the Vault Hunters actually open the vault? The real answer is so that you have enemies to fight on each planet, but still, is making the villains live streamers necessary, especially when there are equally believable methods of growing a cult the Calypsos could have used, and the live stream persona is barely explored beyond its stereotype? Because in all honesty, you sort of forget the villains are live streamers up until they pull out their cameras, which I think speaks to how little this potentially interesting persona adds to their characters. As I said before, the Calypsos are the most powerful villains in the series and pose a significant threat. Though this felt appropriate for a game about opening not one, but several vaults, it leads the Calypsos to take actions of drastic proportions with severe consequences. In a way, it feels like an attempt to one-up the threat posed by Handsome Jack, someone who regularly sabotaged the player. As a result, a few of the biggest twists in the story feel a bit contrived. If the stakes weren't high enough, the writers allowed the Calypsos to take them even higher, which sometimes devalues the hard work of the player and the drama being built up in the storytelling. It can feel a bit sloppy. Additionally, because of the Calypso's goals and the actions they take to reach them, the player gets a lot of exposition thrown at them, which can be extremely disruptive to the storytelling. In Borderlands 2, revelations in the plot were usually simply understood and had a lot of impact because of that. But in Borderlands 3, when a major revelation in the plot occurs, it doesn't usually hit until it's fully explained, or sometimes it never hits because you don't have all the information. Again, simplicity isn't always necessary in compelling storytelling or compelling villains, but Borderlands 3 would have greatly benefited from just a bit more of it. Finally, and most egregiously, the Calypsos aren't very emotionally affecting villains. For the majority of the game, they're all powerful pricks and pure evil, with almost no redeeming qualities. Not that every villain has to be redeemable, but I strongly believe an empathetic villain triumphs over a villain who's evil for evil's sake any day of the week. And this most certainly applies to the Calypsos. You eventually get a reason to empathize with the Calypso twins, but it's barely explored beyond its surface level and feels fairly inconsequential to the narrative at the time you receive it. If anything, this information should have been revealed much earlier in the game and explored in far more depth. In spite of all these reasons, I don't actually hate the Calypso twins. Max Middleman and Elisa Melendez as Troy and Tyrene respectively clearly had a blast with these characters, and there are definitely fun moments with them. The writers of Borderlands 3 also do a good job of keeping them somewhat mysterious, occasionally dropping hints of their backstory and intriguing the player, even if the Calypso's motives are sometimes unclear. And ultimately, they significantly pose the greatest threat of any villain in the series. However, they are also the biggest missed opportunity in the entire game, and a disappointing follow-up to Handsome Jack. So far, it may not seem like the storytelling in Borderlands 3 is peaches and cream. The plot has a handful of issues, and the writing is bogged down by some of the most disruptive conventions you can possibly stuff into a video game script. But I would also like to make abundantly clear that the storytelling of Borderlands 3, without question, has its redeeming qualities, many of which we've already mentioned. In terms of spectacle, there's genuinely few RPGs and even fewer shooters that give as grand of a sci-fi adventure this generation as Borderlands 3 does. This game is bursting with personality around just about every corner. Even if you don't always care for it, there's not one inch of this world that didn't have thought put into it. The diverse cast of Borderlands 3 also creates a super fun, warm-feeling atmosphere. The game is full of some of the most lovable characters in a sci-fi game series ever, even the ones that are jerks to you. It just feels good to be a Crimson Raider. There's also a lot of great humor. Sure, it's mixed in with some over-the-top gags about sex positions and dead memes and probably won't be for everyone, but I laughed a lot while playing this game and already have quotes I want to see on a t-shirt. And perhaps, most importantly, Borderlands 3 has a heart. A really big, innocent heart. One that isn't afraid to show the love it has for its world, its characters, and especially the players and communities who play these games. That might seem like a stretch when you think of some of the creative decisions Gearbox made for this game, and many will surely scoff at the notion that Gearbox had their best interests in mind, but hear me out. Much like with Borderlands 2, Borderlands 3 is hyper aware of where this series began. You start the game by getting off a bus and greeting Claptrap, and in spite of how different it looks in the second game, Pandora feels damn near like a remaster of the first game's locations. Even the Vault Hunters of Borderlands 1 are presented like legends, the badasses who started it all. Similarly, Gearbox is aware of the players who reluctantly gave their bold new IP a chance all the way back in 2009, and helped nurture it to what it is today. 3 games and 10 years later, Borderlands is still very much a co-op shooter and even has split screen, even though it runs like ass at the moment. I never played the original Borderlands on launch, but I've heard countless stories of the players who bonded with their friends and family over that first game. You don't have to look very hard on Reddit to find a story of how someone played Borderlands with their older brother, and then years later Borderlands 2. Or how someone would meet up with their friends after school to grind through the games. No matter the story being told, the guns you shoot, or the loot you loot, at its core, Borderlands is about togetherness and family. And the more I think about Borderlands 3, I can't help but feel like Gearbox tried to reflect those ideas in the story they wanted to tell. Family is everywhere in Borderlands 3. Both the families characters are born into and the ones they make for themselves. The arc on Eden 6 is pretty much a familial dispute between Sir Hammerlock and his sister Aurelia. The Calypsos regard their children of the Vault followers as family, or at least an imitation of one. And the Crimson Raiders, for the first time in the series, actually feel like one big family. Heck, sometimes you hear the word family so much you could swear you're watching a Fast and Furious movie. But what makes the theme of family in Borderlands 3 so meaningful is how families are both formed and torn apart. The heroic sacrifices these characters make to keep their family together. Without spoiling anything significant, sacrifices are definitely made. Gearbox wasn't afraid to put their characters in difficult and sometimes unfair situations with this game. Situations that will no doubt frustrate some players. It's risky storytelling that doesn't always pay off, but in one very powerful way, it does, honoring and respecting the heroism of its characters. Characters like Tannis, Lilith, Maya, Hammerlock, and others get the spotlight in a big way in this game. Like never before, these characters feel like they're fighting for something bigger than themselves. They're fighting for a family, maybe the only thing worth fighting for. By the end of this big crazy adventure, it almost feels like vaults and loot are secondary to the connections these characters have with each other. However, many won't see it that way, and instead focus on where Borderlands 3 screws up the hardest. I get that. The Calypso twins are no handsome Jack, and poop jokes aren't for everyone. But if that's all some reviewers and players can say about the story, I can't help but feel like they're missing the point. It's that no matter where you think the story falls short, you still reach the finale of an incredible 10-year journey. You fought Commandant Steele, Handsome Jack, defeated the Warrior, and fought with the Calypso twins, blowing bandits and skags into meaty chunks pretty much from start to finish. Maybe this journey started for you on a train and not a bus, or maybe it began for you a few weeks ago and now you're grinding Captain Trot for all his legendaries. Wherever it started, you're part of something bigger than just a looter shooter in 2019 now. You're part of a family, one that, in spite of their mistakes, Gearbox has worked very hard to fight for. Maybe Borderlands 3 is just a video game and no more special than the next Call of Duty, the next Destiny expansion, or the next Ghost Recon game. But to me, and surely many others, Borderlands 3 is much more. It's a passionate, sloppily put together love letter, full of big ideas and ambition. And most of all, it's for the family of gamers and fans who've truly found themselves in the Borderlands. On behalf of gamers everywhere, thank you Gearbox for Borderlands 3. I look forward to the next year of content for the game, and whatever lies over the horizon for the series. And, of course, I'd also like to thank our Lord and Savior, Respawn. Hey everyone, thank you so much for watching. This video took around 50 hours to make, not including the 80 to 90 hours I logged into Borderlands 3 since launch. I'd also like to dedicate this video to my friend Jordan, who's currently deployed overseas. Jordan's the biggest Borderlands fan I know besides myself, and I've always considered him family. Jordan, I was thinking about you while playing this game, and I can't wait to play it with you when you're back, buddy. Now that we've talked about Borderlands 2 and 3, where do we go from here? Good question. The channel may just be getting started, but I already have big plans in store for where we go next. There are plenty of gaming videos to come, but for the very next video, we're going to dip our toes into a different medium, film. If you've enjoyed the last 2 videos I've put out, and would really like to see more videos like that, then please subscribe and stay tuned for much more. And hey, before you click off, leave a comment below letting me know what you thought of my video or what you think of Borderlands 3. I understand this is a bit of a divisive game for the Borderlands community, so hopefully I didn't stoke any fires. Again, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll be seeing you all next time. Peace out.